Hello, Will, and welcome to the There Are More of Us show. How's it going?
I'm great, thank you.
Good. Obviously, we've talked some a little bit about familiar work, your work, but for the people that don't know, what kind of content do you make?
Oh, I'm a music composer mostly for video games. Most recently, Star Wars Outlaws, Mortal Kombat 1, Helldivers 2, and Pacific Drive. Actually, this week, my first Japanese anime score is coming out as
Oh,
well. Gundam Requiem for Vengeance. It'll be out on Netflix on the 17th.
I'm a big Gundam fan. I grew up on
Oh,
Gundam,
really?
so
Oh, that's awesome.
that's
Yeah.
perfect. I'm definitely gonna have to check that out. But yeah, so I mean, you've been on a roll with some games. With you obviously said Outlaws, but Helldivers 2 was an unexpected hit that
Yeah.
sort of took over the internet for a while. Mortal Kombat's always a hit. So yeah, I'm glad to have you on. I'm very interested in your journey into becoming a composer and your work as a composer, especially because Outlaws isn't your first stint with Star Wars, right?
No, I actually worked in house at LucasArts for a number of years, starting in 2008. I was a music editor and implementer for the Force Unleashed series.
Okay.
So that meant mostly editing, so like taking music from the films in order to fit it into like cutscenes or build in-game music from that. And then after the Force Unleashed series, I was a composer for Star Wars: The Old Republic.
Hmm.
We had five composers for that project, with Mark Grisky as our lead. And that was my first time working. I mean, number one, writing original music for Star Wars officially,
Hmm.
and also working with a professional live orchestra, which was an incredible experience, of course. After that, I mean, there were quite a few other games, but I was the music composer and music supervisor for a game called Star Wars First Assault.
Hmm.
That was a multiplayer shooter that we were going to release on PlayStation Network and Xbox Live. Unfortunately, the game never came out because of the Disney buyout. But for
Hmm.
that one, I worked with the London Symphony Orchestra at Abbey
Oh, that's
Road.
awesome.
And we developed a whole complex interactive music system that looked at the details of how every player individually was playing the game and also their
Hmm.
situation. And the music system would decide when to play music and what music to play. So it was very very sophisticated, and it worked really well. Unfortunately, no one will ever hear it.
I
But
mean, yeah,
yeah.
that's unfortunate because that sounds amazing, and hopefully they'll, you know, uh, bring it back to use that kind of technology, especially the more complex games have gotten with sort of having multiple branches of storylines and how you can do it. I think that'd be extremely useful, um,
Yeah, well,
just to individualize
what are you gonna
experience.
do?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the funny thing is, like, I've had a lot of games get canceled on me, and it's just part of the business, really. But
Hmm.
you always have, like, you'll never lose the memories. They don't like wipe your brain neuralizer, Men in
Yeah.
Black after you finish. So I mean, a lot of the ideas behind the technology in that game have found their way into future projects.
Hmm.
Um, Not the least of which being, of course, Star Wars Outlaws,
Yeah.
that we would do, what, 10, 11 something years later. But yeah, after First Assault, I went freelance. So, like, I'm not working for any one particular company, but I'm kind of subcontracting to different studios.
Hmm.
And that's when I started working on games like Call of Duty World War II. I worked a little bit on Destiny 2, Forsaken, and Guild Wars 2, Path of Fire.
Hmm.
And eventually, Star Wars Vader Immortal, the Oculus
Oh yeah.
Quest title, I did the music for that one. And after that, finally, Star Wars Outlaws.
So we'll wind the clocks back a little bit. What was your journey into becoming a composer?
Oh, well, I'd always been a musician. I mean, I was studying classical piano all throughout my entire childhood, really, ever since I was like 4 years old. But it wasn't until, I think, ninth grade that I really gave video game music a look. And that was after I'd played Final Fantasy VII. And I'd
Mm-mm-mm.
heard the music, and it was so brilliantly written, but it was also it had a very inviting character, and that's kind of what convinced me, maybe I'm not going to be a concert pianist because I was already kind of losing interest in that, but maybe this composition thing for video games, that was the answer. That's what I wanted to do. And so I started doing a lot of transcription, like MIDI transcription of video game music, mostly for fun, but also it helped me to learn composition and eventually production. And then I started doing little projects, like indie projects that didn't really go anywhere, but it was also a great opportunity to start writing for games. And I did this all throughout high school and college. Eventually I joined the Game Audio Network Guild and started to interact with audio designers and professionals from the AAA industry, and that's kind of what led me to the LucasArts job, and the rest is kind of history from there.
That's awesome. I mean, I can. So Final Fantasy VII, I think, was the first Final Fantasy game I played because my brothers played it, and I mean, it's a classic for a reason. So that being your introduction to video game scores, I think. Whereas for other people, that was like their introduction to the Final Fantasy games, or maybe role-playing games in general. It's
exactly, yeah.
See, no matter what art you're getting into, there's always that through line.
Mm-hmm.
So you talked about your journey into LucasArts. So, what is your sort of Star Wars story from working behind the scenes? The people you've gotten to work with, the work that you've been able to do.
Do you mean like what do you mean like
So like I have I have a journey as a fan, having watched the movies as a kid, and then now interacting with other fans, for you having worked in different eras of Star Wars, and working in different eras like in the universe itself. What has that process sort of been like for you?
Well, I mean, before I even started working at LucasArts, I had researched the Star Wars soundtracks quite a bit all throughout college. Star Wars and Indiana Jones. I just kind of became a John Williams fan all throughout college.
Hard not to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like John Williams and I think Igor Stravinsky were my two composers that I was studying nonstop. And that included I didn't really have access to the scores, but I would take the music from the films and try to transcribe it note for note. And that really helped me to learn more about orchestration and John Williams's his style. It's very unique, especially for the Star Wars scores. So by the time I had finished college and I'd had a little bit of work experience, I already had a pretty extensive knowledge of Star Wars music. And so when it came time to interview for LucasArts, I just let them know, like, hey, I'm not like a huge mega fan necessarily of the films. I've watched all of them, obviously, but I'm not like, I don't have like all the figurines or Han Solo in carbonite, whatever. But instead, I just really know the music quite a lot. And they appreciated that. They respected the honesty that I wasn't like necessarily a fanboy of the franchise, but that I was just really enthusiastic about the music itself. And then I think over the course of the 5 years I was there, I kind of did become a little bit on the fanboy side. I tried to fight it, but it's kind of impossible. It's really impossible. I mean, you have to imagine, like, I'm sitting here in my office, right? Sometimes we would not have tasks directly related to the games, and so it was more about improving the department as a whole. And part of that for me was now I do have access to the handwritten scores for all of the Star Wars films. And of course I have the movies themselves. So there, and I was trying to diagram everything to make sure that we had a very easy, basically encyclopedia of every single piece of music in Star Wars. So you now have to imagine me watching all of these films in my office over the course of a couple weeks, reading along with the scores and taking a ton of notes on every single cue. Except, as you know, there are some very depressing moments in those films. They can be quite heavy. So, like, I'm trying to hold back tears while I'm, like, at the office, like, working and stuff. And I'm like, what did it go? All that kind of thing. So that's, like, probably the greatest extent of my fanboyish tendencies that happen in my time working at LucasArts was, desperately trying to pretend like I hadn't been sobbing while like someone just walks into my office asking a completely irrelevant question.
Hey, you won. You were winning. You're
Yeah,
winning with that.
I guess, yeah.
When you were at, well, both when it was LucasArts and when you were with Outlaws, did you have access to music that was written but was never used in other games, or deleted scenes from movies or TV shows?
Yeah, I mean, we had everything that Skywalker had recorded for, well, Skywalker didn't work, but you know what I mean. We had the whole
Yeah.
repository from the prequels, especially.
Hmm.
Um, I'm sure I guess all of it was used in the films, but I mean, there's a lot of stuff that wasn't in the soundtracks at the time. I
Hmm.
think they did some re-releases of. This is both Star Wars and Indiana Jones. I think they did some re-releases of the soundtrack that did include these extra pieces,
Hmm.
but they all have completely different names, and so I wouldn't even know what like the greater public knows this cue as. That you know.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Having that, the Star Wars music really being a part of your journey since college, what does Star Wars music mean to you?
Well, I mean, it's just about the epitome of orchestral scoring for film. There's almost not. What I always say is there's almost nothing you could do with an orchestra that John Williams hasn't already done in
Hmm.
now 9 Star Wars films. And yeah, I mean, it's just that it's that highest level of orchestration, of performance as well. It's incredibly well performed, mostly by the London Symphony Orchestra at Abbey Road.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, I mean, that's really all there is to it. It's about, about as good as it ever has gotten and possibly will ever get for orchestral scoring in films. And so it's such a brilliant opportunity to be able to work in the franchise that I'm very grateful for.
Yeah, I can't imagine for any composer to have to come after John Williams in anything, whether that was Star Wars, Harry Potter, Indiana Jones,
Mm.
uh, the Olympics. I mean, they still use this
Yeah.
score for the Olympics, but um, just to step into that world, it's got to be both a gift and a burden. I can only
Yeah,
imagine.
it's more fun than people realize. I get that question a lot. It's just fun. I don't know what to say. Doing that, the John Williams side of it is just very liberating. There's a
Mhm.
lot of stuff that maybe harmonically or in terms of orchestration that you can do in a Star Wars context that almost no other project will ever allow you to do. Either because they'll think that it's like outdated or maybe too academic, sometimes they'll say, and
Mhm.
it's kind of a bummer when that happens because you're like, well, this is, I'm just channeling one of the greatest scores ever written, but
Yeah.
here we are. So when you now get into the Star Wars universe, now you can do it. It feels liberating, honestly. um, I mean, I'm obviously very grateful to the maestro for bringing back that style of very rigorous orchestral composition into the scoring world, because it's not something that you necessarily get to do every time.
Yeah, I mean, I went to Star Wars Celebration 2022, and
Mm.
I happened to get into the studio showcase where they debuted the Kenobi theme for the first time, and they had brought on John
Oh yeah,
Williams to compose it. And so
wow.
I was like, that is a nerd bucket checklist that I never thought I'd get checked off, and just that like have that experience of, uh, you know, listening to the maestro at work.
Yeah.
I'd made sure I saved like 5 different backup copies so I could never lose that. uh, so now we're going to get into your favorites, and this is all going to be more tailored to music.
Sure.
Um, this might be a hard one because I don't have a good answer for it. I mean, I think I have like two depending on the day. But what is your favorite Star Wars score? Like whole
Oh,
film score?
um, I mean, I guess I'm supposed to say Episode 5, um, which is definitely my favorite film, and
Hmm.
obviously I appreciate all of the new themes. Not the least of which Imperial March, which is probably one of the most iconic pieces of score music ever written. But in terms of just like the fun of it, I would actually say Episode Two, Attack
Hmm.
of the Clones, is probably my favorite. Just in terms of like the fun of orchestral scoring.
I mean, Attack of the Clones is where my favorite track comes from. Across the Stars is my favorite. I
Oh
love Across
yeah,
the
yeah.
Stars. That was I played the saxophone growing up, and so I saw a
Oh,
Star Wars book, um, at a Marshall's Music, and I went with my dad, and he was like, "All right, pick out something that like you want to play outside of what I had to play for school." And I saw
yeah.
that, and I first thing I did as soon as I got home was Across the Stars.
You know what's funny about that piece? Have you ever watched the movie Catch Me If You Can?
Yeah, the one with Leo and Tom Hanks.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You ever notice that the bridge from Catch Me If You Can main theme and the bridge from Across the Stars are like exactly the same?
Now I'm gonna have to go back and listen to that
Yeah.
because I don't think I've watched Catch Me If You Can as a whole like film instead of just pieces you catch on TV in a few years. So
Yeah.
now I'm definitely gonna have to go back and listen to
Check
that
it out. It's
now.
it's like eerily similar. I mean, they were written around the same time, and obviously they're different stylistically. One is more jazz oriented, and the other is a very grand, sweeping orchestra. But it's just a very strange similarity. You'll notice. Like it's very
and,
funny.
and it's an excuse to watch Catch Me If You Can again, which I
It was a good
that's
film. Yeah.
yeah, it's a good film. So we're going to score now. We're going to narrow it down to track. What is your favorite Star Wars track?
Well, my favorite from Ep 2 was Zam the Assassin,
Mm-hmm.
um, which is kind of a cheating answer because it's actually like two or three tracks kind of put together in the album. Um, but yeah, again, it's just very wild orchestration and just really bold, really interesting stuff. Besides that, I mean, other very obvious ones like the asteroid field from Episode 5
Mm-hmm.
is another favorite. Um, Yeah, there's quite a lot, but those are the two that really jump out.
And then now we're going to narrow it down even further. But you're
Okay.
going to get three this time. So three of your favorite character themes throughout Star Wars.
Oh, there's a lot. Like, there's more than you would think,
Mm.
actually. And this is something I discovered doing that sort of internal encyclopedia of themes. I mean, like, Darth Maul has a theme, and it's not Duel
Hmm.
of the Fates. It's actually played with bass clarinets and possibly saxophones.
Hmm.
Yeah, but nobody. It didn't really come back, so it's rarely used. I think it's only stated like two or three times. Um, yeah, it's just a tricky one. Hmm. So many of them were because character themes are such like an original trilogy thing, you know.
Hmm.
In the prequels, they're not quite as. I mean, they're there, but they're not quite as prominent. Um, I love the story of how when John Williams originally did Leia's theme, he thought that Luke and Leia would be an item,
Hmm.
and George Lucas didn't tell him until later on that like, oh, actually they're brother and sister. So he's like, oh, really? So you maybe do this rising, what is it, major sixth or whatever love interval for nothing? But yeah, I mean, Leia's theme is great. Obviously, I'm trying to remember which other ones. Yoda's is also another great one.
Hmm.
Um, the Stormtroopers theme is the only one that well, I was about to say stole, but it's the only one that I referenced on Star Wars Outlaws.
Hmm.
Out of all the themes in the original trilogy, I was this close to using Jabba's theme, but for various reasons it didn't quite fit in the way that I needed it to, so I wrote my own that was sort of similar.
Hmm.
Which is another great one, Jabba's theme. It reminds me so much of the Uncle Ruckus stinger
Yes.
from
Yes.
Rudolph. Which I don't know if like they just licensed that or what's the deal with it, but it's very funny. Um, yeah, I'm thinking of all the. Were there new themes or character themes in Episode 6? I wonder, because I know Lando's theme, but that would have been in Episode 5.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. And then C-3PO and R2's theme was also early F5.
Unless they gave Mon Mothma a theme. Well, yeah, and they
Don't
just.
think so.
Well, I guess there is a variation of the Imperial March for the Emperor.
Oh, the Emperor has his own theme. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And yeah, which
Which
okay,
is also a really fun one. Yeah.
which I don't know if people if this is accurate or not because you see the YouTube videos about it, but they say if you I they say inverse, but I don't think that's the right word for the Emperor's theme. It's the end track for the celebration scene at the end of
Yep.
the Phantom Menace. Is that accurate?
You don't have to invert it. You just have to take it down several octaves. So it's sort of like a children's chorus, going, ah,
Yeah.
ah, ah, and then take that way down, and now it's oh, 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 oh,
Misconfirmed. All right.
well, it's just one of the things that I wish people kind of realized about composers is that we don't play by like rules.
Hmm.
So in John Williams' mind, he was like, "Yeah, I'll just reference this, great," and contextually, he wanted the intervals to be a little bit different, just to fit the vibe. But it's still a reference to that theme for sure.
Hmm.
Just like Anakin's theme towards the end hints at Darth Vader's theme in Ep One.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
All right. So now we're getting in. We're gonna get to Outlaws in a second, which there will be spoilers for people that have not played the game yet.
Yeah.
Which I feel like most people are further ahead of it than I am, but I'm aware of what happens. Uh, it's what happens when you go on the internet. But when you go to create a piece of music, whether that's just a track or just a composition as a whole, and you can talk about it generally or when you're doing it with Star Wars, what is that process like? How do you approach it?
Yeah, I mean, at the start of like a soundtrack in general, like when I'm first starting a score, usually I like to do what I call pre-composition, which is just study, basically. Excuse me. So maybe I'm watching some films that might be relevant, or TV shows, or other games. Maybe I'm reading a book that I think might get me into like the mindset of it. That was big on Call of Duty, reading like when I was doing Call of Duty World War II, I was reading some military fantasy type books, or fiction, I should say. Um, there's also transcription. Sometimes I'll transcribe other pieces in whatever genre it is that I'll be writing. So before I did Outlaws and some of the other Star Wars projects, I would just pick a random piece of Star Wars music and then transcribe it note for note without using the score, just kind of by ear, just so that I internalized what the music should be. And beyond that, once I'm starting to get a sense of generally what I want the score to be, I'll keep a document of just notes. I actually use Trello for this, which is like a
Mhm.
kind of like a note-taking software. And I'll just write ideas down. They don't have to be musical at all. It can like literally be a color or anything. But just any thoughts I have about the score and what it should feel like, I'll put on Trello. Finally, once I have it's you can almost imagine this like gradually fading in more detail. So eventually, I'll start doing paper sketches, which is
Mhm.
where just on paper I'm writing notes down and very simple. Like I try to sketch as little as possible, but just enough that I can produce music later on. If the music is very complicated, like if it's a piece of space battle music or something, then maybe
Mhm.
I'll do an intermediary step where I do a piano sketch in my DAW so I can
Mhm.
hear it in time. Uh, so I know, oh, maybe this section can be a little longer or this section shorter or whatever. And then finally, I'll start to arrange and produce the piece. Usually starting with the orchestra and then later on adding whatever non-orchestral instruments, like if there's synthesis or whatnot. And this is assuming that it's a Star Wars orchestral piece that does have that.
So, it's a lot because it's hard to conceptualize when you don't do that process. So when you're stepping into the world, like you brought up, Call of Duty World War II, where there were previous Call of Duty games, obviously, and then there was World at War, which was a previous World War II game. I feel like is that different for you than stepping into Star Wars, where you are stepping into this timeline and you're existing in that universe, whereas with Call of Duty, you have all the different games in the different eras and they mix and match and things like that.
Well, it's a lot of pressure either way. I mean,
Hmm.
both. both Call of Duty and Star Wars, and especially Gundam. I looked back at the previous entries in the franchises, and it's just the laundry list of all of my favorite composers.
Mhm.
For Call of Duty, it was Michael Giacchino. He's definitely one of my absolute favorites, especially
Same
for
here.
his video game music. I mean, obviously he's more famous as a film and TV composer, but his video game scores actually from usually the PlayStation 2 era. Those are by far my favorites of all of his work. Actually, I highly recommend checking those out. But he did the first Call of Duty, and he also did several Medal of Honor scores, which I think were my absolute favorites of his. And so it was a ton of pressure there following that act up. Not to mention, obviously, Lorne Balfe and Hans Zimmer worked on Call of Duty. Harry Gregson Williams, especially, and Stephen Barton as well. I think Steven and I are the only people to do both Call of Duty and Star Wars, so it's just like no pressure there, right? Like, good lord. But yeah, I mean, no matter what, you are just figuring out, all right, well, yes, it's in a franchise, but it's also its own game. So how do you balance the franchise expectations with the needs of the game itself? In Star Wars' case, it wasn't a terribly difficult answer each time, because you can just look at the game and see, like, well, does this really connect with the films one-to-one? Like in Vader Immortal, for instance, like, it's right in the title. I mean, you have to, it's right there. It's so clearly a part of not only the story, but also the vibe and the situation from the films, the prequels in particular for that game. Whereas Star Wars Outlaws, it was in the same places and around the same time, but a completely different aspect of it. We didn't really see too much about the criminal syndicates, especially in the original trilogy. So that kind of afforded us more leeway in terms of instrumentation, especially, and also the vibe of the score. It's a little bit different, and you just kind of pick and choose what are you going to bring from the films versus what do you have to come up with on your own.
So now let's get into Outlaws. There
Sure.
will be spoilers in and out of it. So if you haven't played the game yet, or you haven't finished watching someone's playthrough of it and you don't want to be spoiled, skip ahead. I will put the timestamp in the video when we're done. But so you alluded to this earlier. We didn't get a lot of the criminal syndicates in the films, and we only really got a small segment in the TV show so far. So how did you approach, sort of writing these tracks where you're introducing new characters like, Zeresh Best, as an organization, you have K-Vest, you have ND5, you have Ankh, and you have Jaden and Slero and all these other people. Yeah, I'll leave it at that, and then I'll have a follow-up.
Sure, yeah. So for the criminal factions and the planets, what we did, because I had hired two other co-composers, John Everest and Kazuma Jinochi, and we kind of shared among them. I did all of the Imperial faction, the Hutts, the Pikes, and the Zarek Besh, and then John did the Crimson Dawn, and Kazuma did the Ashiga clan. And what we did was I just built this big music design document that we all shared, and for each of the planets and each of the factions, we just listed what are the signature sounds for this planet or for this faction. Things like, Crimson Dawn uses a lot of electric cello, for instance, or Ashiga clan uses a lot of Japanese wind instruments. Things like that, and I would just list those, and we would, as we're writing, it was basically a free slate to put whatever you want. However, number one, stay out of other people's instrumental lane, and also number two, try to integrate grimy analog bass. For some reason, grimy analog bass just became the sound of the syndicate. So pretty much all of the crime syndicates had some aspect, some reinterpretation of that sound. And yeah, we just kind of went from there. The planets themselves, they also had their own signature sounds, though obviously not as grimy necessarily, but more about making it feel like the ambient music is coming out of the planet itself. Um, so I mean, John's music for Akiva is a great example of this because it has this equatorial vibe to it. It's very Amazonian, and so he used a lot of things like contrabass recorder actually, and then some sounds that he designed to just give that sort of jungle vibe, um, and so on. And we just did this in order to really paint each of these planets very differently, so that as you're going from planet to planet, it feels like you're going on an adventure because every
Yeah.
planet sounds completely different from the others. In terms of character themes, what actually happened there is they sent me these documents that outlined the character's entire history, much of which never is represented in the game. It's just sort of to keep everyone in line. We have to know exactly where they came from and all of their story up until this point in the game. And then obviously we know what happens from then on. So I would look at these and I would actually have each of my themes be like a history in and of itself. So it has a narrative. So every theme kind of has a start, middle, and end. For instance, Nyx's theme, Nyx being the little pet character that you use, it starts with him in captivity, and then it has this more sing-songy part where it's Nyx and Kay discovering each other, and Kay frees him, and they become best friends. And then it goes into the more upbeat Irish music and African music influence section, which is more about like this is what you're doing during gameplay. ND5's theme was another favorite where it's got that kind of film noir, almost jazzy quality with the solo clarinet and vibraphone starting it off, and then the jazz guitar melody. But as it's going, yeah, it's painting ND5, but then it kind of goes into a flashback of when ND5 was in the Clone Wars. As a battle droid, and it's this more military thing, and then it finally finishes with the aspect of his character that's full of regret and his desire for redemption. So each theme kind of has that narrative contour to it.
Yeah, that has spawned a few questions already.
Sure.
But I do feel like I have been to all the planets at the point of the game where I'm at. So I do, you do feel like every planet is its own thing. Not only just the visual design, but the sound is different.
Oh yeah.
Although the only sound being the same, being blaster fire, and then that little musical cue when there's an enemy nearby. Thank you for that. But I remember the like when you get those flashbacks with Kay and her mom, you have that one, and then eventually when you find her mom. Her mom ends up being, the last part of the heist scheme. Like, there's that sort of I don't know if Kay, and I can't remember her mom's name right now, is its
Rico.
own track, Nico. Yeah, but there is this, there is this sound difference in the music when you have them. And I don't know if you know that off the top of your head, but
Well, Rico has her own theme as well.
yeah.
And that one I think is the most overtly narrative, just going through her whole life history. It's funny. It's actually a beautiful story, but it's never really represented, as far as I know. It's never really represented in the game fully. You just know from the perspective of Kay, and all that. But I really emphasized, well, not emphasize, but I understood her character a little bit more. Maybe sympathize is the better answer for me and Rico. So I wanted to write something special that wasn't quite so obvious to someone who'd only played the game, but maybe gives a little bit more depth to her character and suggesting that she's more than just a runaway parent that is perhaps less than responsible.
Yeah. And we don't get a lot of mothers in Star Wars, especially with those that live to the end of the story that they're featured in. So
Yeah,
I think
it's just
giving her that special moment too is something that I think contributes to what I've seen some of my friends talk about online. Like, we need more Star Wars mothers, because I think the only one that is currently alive throughout it is Hera, I think. think everybody else like Shmi,
Shmi,
Baru,
hella dead.
uh,
Yeah.
um, Brea, Leia are all
Oh
gone. So I think
yeah,
Hera is the only one that's left. Um,
yeah.
but yeah. So when you got to well, when you got, I guess, the script of the story outline or whatever they gave you, and so you saw that you could that you were going to get Jabba. Obviously, you got Lando, you got Vader. How was being able to incorporate those, sort of those legendary characters and with their own well-known themes, like into this, for the criminal syndicate part at least, this newer aspect of Star Wars, not music, and also Star Wars exploration.
Yeah, I mean, in Java's case, that was the original plan to use his theme,
Hmm.
but then kind of once push came to shove, and we realized just like his role in the story, but also like what the Hutt's role was, it became obvious that like I have to keep Java's theme as its own separate thing, and really write like a Hutt theme that's more malleable for what we needed it to be in the
Mm-hmm.
game. But it is very clearly Java influence. It's like two tubas kind of sound playing in duets and in thirds or whatever. And that's used in Mos Eisley. Each one of the cities, by the way, like there's always like some moment where I have a reference to a faction theme, whichever faction is most dominant there.
Mm-hmm.
So like yeah, for in this case, very obviously the Hutt cartel is what I wanted to reference there. Um, as far as the others, I mean, I don't want to be the one to start making spoilers. So maybe if you ask this question later on, then I will. But there were other character themes that may have been addressed in the score.
Well, I know Vader was in there.
Oh, there
That
you
one
go.
got spoiled for me uh, before I even got the game. And I'm just like, the game had, because I bought it when the game came out. I don't remember if they did early access, but they're just like, that was such a perfect use of Vader. And I was like, okay, I'm not surprised, but I would
Uh,
like to see that. So I'm in the final person. I
it was
do Vader.
supposed to
So
be a surprise,
yeah,
but I
like I always
mean,
like to see, old Wheezy pop up out of nowhere. Like when he popped up at the end of Jedi Fallen Order, I was just like, what do you
mm,
mean? There's this I can't remember what his name is, but I'll send it to you. There's this streamer he was playing it, and then he was like, "Hold on, I got to turn my camera," because he heard the breathing, and just his reaction to having Vader in Fallen Order is just hilarious.
yeah.
But it's just one of those things. It's just like, yeah, Vader's the boogeyman. Like it's always nice to get a reaction when he pops up.
So the funny thing about that is that I don't even actually honestly remember why, but for some reason on Vader Immortal, I was not allowed to use the Imperial March
Hmm.
for Vader, so I had to make my own Vader theme, which was intimidating, for
Yeah.
sure. Because it's like, come on, man. Even if I did a good job, it doesn't matter because everyone has known this for the last like what 50 years.
Yeah.
But regardless, I did write one, and I've never actually said this publicly before, but I stole that for Outlaws. So you are hearing a continuation of the Vader Immortal Vader theme in Outlaws when Vader comes up. Because, yeah. I don't actually even think I told Ubisoft that. So, see if, settle amongst yourselves if I have to sue myself in order to.
Well, I'm not the biggest on IP law because you have to have a specific set, like you have to have a science degree to get into that sort of work. But I'm sure with entertainment law, there's a Venn diagram there. But I think you can't really steal from yourself, and you're working for the same company that you did it for. So, I mean,
Made sense.
the favorite lawyer and law professor answer when asking a legal question: it depends.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So, um, I do also want to note that the cantina and bar music is always fun. I
Oh
think you
yeah.
you carry on that tradition well of having, sort of that fun lived in sort of that what we hear, but also like the diegetic music for the people
Yeah,
in
yeah.
the universe as well. So that was a cool touch. Um,
Yeah, that was Cody Matthew Johnson, who
mhm.
I hired to do all of the Cantina stuff, and then he subcontracted for all the musicians. He has a ton of amazing musicians performing it, and yeah, he did a great job with that one for sure.
Uh, so I don't know how this is going to work because I maybe it might be asking you what is your favorite child, but what is some of your favorite tracks from that are in Outlaws?
Oh, I would have to say like just about all of the character themes,
Mhm.
because like it's rare to be able to write a character theme in a game score, especially a Western game score, because like the clients usually are all like, okay, we have. We get paid by the minute of final music, and so they're usually like, how do we maximize everything we can get out of this compose, and
Mhm.
character themes that aren't necessarily going to go right into the game as is. It's rare that they would ever allow music to be spent on that. But the team Ubisoft Massive and our audio team and music team, they were just so creative, and they wanted to foster creativity in all of us. So yeah, I mean, I had honestly that was probably the most fun was just writing all of the character themes. Um, I would say maybe Rico and ND5's themes were my favorites.
Mhm.
Jalen's was a lot of fun to write because I got to do like some like nice electric bass stuff with that.
Mhm.
I love the combination of bass and piano for some reason. I think I learned that from Erica Badu, her album Mama's
Mm.
Gun. I just thought it just sounds cool when you combine that. Maybe the piano is way higher in its octaves, and then the bass is low, and then you have the moving in unison. But that's what Jalen's was all about. ND5, it was so much fun being able to write for this character and get into that kind of jazzy vibe. I was definitely uh, maybe not referencing, but at least vibing with the "Catch Me If You Can" score on that
Mhm.
one, at least a little bit. And I got to play the guitar on that myself, which is a lot of fun being able to play on my own scores. Um, and then Rico's theme was a joy to orchestrate, and the performance was so incredible. The Nashville Scoring Orchestra performed Rico, actually most of, if not all of the character themes, aside from Kay's theme, which we did in Glasgow.
Mhm.
But yeah, that was a joy to record that one for sure.
Yeah. Well, I definitely have to say, you guys absolutely rocked it with the Outlaws. Score. It's interesting when there's obviously times where everything like you're just like, wow, that was really cool. That kind of like that moment. But it's another thing where you're like so totally absorbed in
Mm.
what you're playing, like this, or what you're watching at the score is just sort of like permeates through you. And I feel like that's most of the time with Outlaws, especially when for the
Oh.
sometimes it's a slower game and you can hear it, but I feel like I hear it more in the fast paced moments when I'm like on the speeder and I'm getting chased, or
Yeah.
I'm running through an Imperial base, or the Pike Syndicate's base, and I'm not wanted there because I'm cool with all the other ones except for the Pike Syndicate. Like I saw the Book
Yeah.
of Boba Fett, I saw Clone Wars. I'm not a fan of the Pikes.
Yeah, they're not great.
Yeah. But thank you again for coming on. This is great. Before we go, I know you talked about yet Gundam coming up, but if there's any other projects you
Yeah.
have coming up that you want to plug, or anything that you're doing on social media or your website, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, you can find me on Twitter, just at Wilbert Roget. And yeah, I'm very much looking forward to the Gundam release. I've been working on that on and off for the past like 4 years.
Mm,
And then only like last year did we really like get the footage and we could just score it from there. But it's a very special project to me, part because it's my first time doing anything in the Japanese anime world, which I
mhm.
never thought I would like have any chance to work there. Uh, and this opportunity came up, and it was a joy to work on that one as well. So I really hope that everyone has a chance to experience it.
Yeah. So that drops on Netflix this month.
On the 17th, so this
Yeah.
week, in
Okay.
like
Yeah.
3 days actually. Yeah.
Yeah, quite a few things drop. So I guess you guys know when we're recording this. But yeah, so make sure you check out the new Gundam series coming out on Netflix. And I'm sure most of the people listening to this, you've either played Outlaws or Helldivers or Mortal
Yeah.
Kombat or Call of Duty because nerds tend to cross over in the franchises we love to interact with. But thank you again, Will. This was a great episode. I'm glad that you could come on and share your love of music and your work with us.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And everybody, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe and show Will some love. Let him know what you've loved about his work over on Twitter and check out the Netflix series, the Netflix Gundam series it'll be out when this releases.
Yeah.
And until next time, remember, there are more of us.